In December of 1976, 81-year-old George Clarence Seitz was living in the Jamaica neighborhood of Queens, New York. He was a veteran of World War I, and the war had a lasting impact on him. Had he lived later when the condition was better understood, he may have been diagnosed as having post-traumatic stress disorder. He was very reclusive, and he did not trust banks, meaning he always carried all of his money around with him. This meant that on the rare occasions he did leave his house, he would pull out a giant wad of cash, often worth thousands of dollars, to pay for anything he purchased. Around 10 a.m. on December 10, 1976, George left home to walk to Haircutters, a barbershop 2.5 blocks away, to get his hair cut. He never returned home. It would be nearly 45 years before authorities learned what happened to George. On November 3, 2021, 74-year-old Martin Moda was arrested and charged with George's murder. The events that led to authorities being able to determine that George had been murdered began more than 2 years earlier. On March 11, 2019, a woman in her 50s called the police to tell them about something she had witnessed back in 1976, when she was 11 years old. According to authorities, she had not come forward earlier because of intimidation and concerns about repercussions. The witness reported that as a child, she had seen her mother's boyfriend cut up a body inside of the barbershop he owned with his brother. The barbershop was Haircutters, where George Seitz got his haircut, and the boyfriend was Martin Moda. The witness further stated that she later saw Moda with black garbage bags, burying them in the backyard. The following day, investigators went to the home where the witness reported seeing the burial, at 8772 115th Street in the Richmond Hill neighborhood of Queens. Forensic anthropologists began excavating the backyard and located a makeshift grave in the exact spot where the witness said it would be. They uncovered a partial torso and a pelvis. The body had been dismembered at the shoulders, neck, and hips. The advanced state of decomposition the remains were found in complicated extracting DNA from them, but the medical examiner was ultimately able to identify a complete DNA profile. By this time, genetic genealogy was becoming a popular tool for law enforcement. However, at the time, New York state law only allowed for genetic genealogy to be used to identify suspects, not victims. The FBI did not have such limitations, so they were brought in to the investigation. In February of 2021, the NYPD partnered with Othram Laboratories, who created a comprehensive genealogical profile. The profile was given to the FBI, who generated leads for the NYPD and the Queens District Attorney's Office to follow up on. Potential relatives of the victim were identified in California and Ohio, and investigators traveled to speak with them. The next major break in the case came when they went to Ohio. The individuals they went to speak with were not surprised when a detective from the NYPD came to speak with them, and instantly assumed they were there to discuss a relative of theirs they had been searching for over the past 45 years. They explained the story of George Seitz and his disappearance. They also revealed George's habit of always having a lot of cash on him. DNA samples collected from these relatives confirmed that the remains found in Richmond Hill belonged to George Seitz. The family was grateful to finally have answers about what happened to George. With the information provided by George's family, prosecutors were able to present robbery as the motive for the murder when they presented the case to the grand jury that ultimately indicted Martin Moda on a charge of second-degree murder. During the course of their investigation, the NYPD and the Queens District Attorney's Office uncovered what they described as crucial evidence which they allege ties Moda to the murder. Their investigation included multiple witness interviews and record searches covering multiple agencies in 5 different states. Moda appeared in court to discuss the possibility of bail. He was remanded to custody and is currently being held at the Anna M. Cross Correctional Facility. His next court appearance is scheduled for December 3rd. Raymond Jones was an outgoing and popular man. He always had a smile on his face, and he loved to tease and play jokes. When he met a woman named Betty in the 1950s, they had many common interests, like dancing and fishing. The two began spending all their time together, engaged in all the activities they both loved. The couple married and had 3 children together. Their one son, Jeffrey, shared Ray's birthday of September 7th. Betty and Ray also loved racing stock cars, but this shared interest would ultimately tear them apart rather than keep them together. Betty was in a serious wreck, and while she survived, she was left paralyzed from the waist down. The stress of her serious injury put a strain on the marriage, and Betty and Ray ultimately divorced. The couple's children stayed with their mother at their home in Montana, while Ray moved to Salmon, Idaho. He got remarried to a woman named Donna, and the couple adopted a little boy. Ray became very close with his neighbors, the Pearson family, and the Joneses and the Pearsons spent a lot of time together. Raymond would practice shooting with his friend, Ralph Pearson, and would play tricks on Ralph's young children. Ralph Pearson would be the last known person to see Ray alive. Ray spent his 39th birthday, September 7th, 1968, out bow hunting with a hunting party that included Ralph, as well as 2 other hunters. They set up camp in the Hayden Creek area of Lemhi County, Idaho. Later that afternoon, Ray signaled to Ralph that he was going to move up higher on the mountain they were hunting on. When it began getting dark, Ralph returned to camp, assuming Ray would do the same. Ray never arrived back at the camp. Ralph and the other 2 hunters spent the following day looking for Ray. When they were unsuccessful, they contacted the sheriff, and a larger search, involving more than 70 people, as well as search dogs, began on September 9th. In addition to the ground search, helicopters were brought in to look for Ray from the air. The search effort had to be called off after just a few days because of snow. It was briefly reopened a few days later when footprints were found on a ridge near the area where Ray had gone missing, but no sign of him was found. 2 days after his father went missing, Jeffrey Jones received a birthday card from him in the mail. I believed for a long time that he would be found. I kept hoping, and it was probably 15 years before I finally gave up. Rumors and stories kept circulating that somebody had seen him or that he took off. I heard all this stuff and just kept expecting or hoping that he would walk through the door one day, Jeffrey would later say. Ralph Pearson never used the bow he had been hunting with on the day Ray vanished again. It remained on the top shelf of his closet until he passed away in 2010, and possession of it went to his daughter Kendra. The last thing Ralph's daughter Karen said to him before he died was, "Dad, go find Ray." Ray would not be found until 53 years and 10 days after he disappeared. Around 4 p.m. on September 17, 2021, a bow hunter was taking a shortcut between 2 hunting areas when he came across human remains. He called the Lemhi County Sheriff's Office to notify them of his discovery. Because it was so late in the day, they were not able to come out to the site until the following morning. When they examined the remains, authorities found part of a wallet. Inside of it was the identification card of Raymond Jones. The bow hunter who found the remains has not been publicly identified, but he has spoken to Ray's family. "I'm very relieved to know what happened. I'm grateful to the guy that found him. I couldn't have asked for a better person to find my dad. After talking to him, he's just a super guy," Jeffrey Jones said after speaking with the hunter. Ray had told the other hunters he had wanted to look for mountain goats that day while they were back at camp. A large rock, matching the type of rock that made up the cliffs above where the remains were found, was found covering the lower half of the remains. The hunter who found Ray told Jeffrey that he believed Ray may have seen mountain goats at the top of the cliffs, and then tried to climb up the cliff to see them better. Part of the cliff may have broken off as he did so, and landed on top of him after he fell. "The past week and a half have been surreal, but I'm very lucky to know what happened to my dad after all these years," Jeffrey said after his father's remains were found. "I could have gone my whole life without knowing, but now I know, and it brings some peace." Jeffrey planned to bring his father's remains back to Montana so that Ray can be buried next to his parents. Mervin Sinclair was a Cree man from George Gordon First Nation in Saskatchewan. He had a happy-go-lucky spirit and loved to sing and play the guitar. He did not enjoy school and left after grade 6. He had an adventurous spirit and did not scare easily. In 1958, the 23-year-old was a private in Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. Over the long Easter weekend, he he visited family in Saskatchewan. However, when he arrived, he looked as though he had been roughed up, according to his family, and he drank heavily that weekend. Mervin told his family that just prior to his Easter leave, a commanding officer had made a sexual advance towards him, which he had refused to go along with. The two men got into a fight, which the commanding officer lost. Mervin's father was a survivor of one of Canada's infamous residential schools, and he had taught Mervin to box when he was young, so that he would always be able to defend himself. That was not an uncommon thing happening to Native people. I can believe that because I've watched it, Mervin's sister Darlene would later say. My father was a boxer, and he taught the boys how to look after themselves physically, because we were Native people living off the reserve. Mervin was concerned about what would happen to him as an Indigenous man on the base or in military prison, if he were sent there because of the fight. He was also concerned that he might not even make it to prison, as the officer had threatened him, saying, "You'll regret this once you get back." Mervin's family believed he was still planning to return to Canadian Forces Base Wainwright in Alberta. He was last seen hitchhiking in Alberta. On May 15th, he was declared absent without leave. Mervin's family learned that he was missing when military police arrived at Ralph's home looking for him. They initially arrested Ralph, believing him to be Mervin because of their strong physical resemblance. When the possessions Mervin had left behind at the base were returned to his family, his clothes were all covered in blood, increasing the family's fears that something had happened to Mervin on base that the military wasn't telling them about. Ralph Sinclair never gave up looking for his brother, even as decades went on without any leads as to what had happened to him. Ralph spoke to the media and posted handmade missing persons flyers throughout Western Canada. He died in the fall of 2020, without ever learning his beloved brother's fate. Just a few months later, however, a woman the Sinclairs had never met took a commercial DNA test and solved Mervin's disappearance 63 years after he went missing. Jelaine Davidson was raised by her mother and stepfather in Calgary, Alberta. She knew very little about her biological father. Her mother had left him and the home they shared in Hope, British Columbia, around the time Jelaine turned 1. Jelaine's mother wanted him to marry her, but he refused, without ever providing an answer as to why. He was very secretive, which also contributed to the end of the relationship. Jelaine's mother told her that her father was a man named William Baca. He was Cherokee and from Oklahoma. His parents were named Victor and Nora. She did not have any further information about his background. In 1980, when Jelaine was a teenager, she was contacted by a mutual friend of her family and her biological father to inform her that William had been killed in a car accident. After Jelaine learned that her father had passed away, she also learned that he had tried to be a part of her life. Her grandmother confessed that he had written letters to her over the years, but she had thrown the letters away because Jelaine had been adopted by her stepfather, who had since divorced Jelaine's mother. She realized that she had made a mistake by doing this and apologized to Jelaine. It took Jelaine another decade to finally become ready to try to research her father and his family. Her mother was white, so she knew nothing about her Indigenous heritage, but hoped to learn about it. She called the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Terrace, British Columbia, where her father had died, to inquire about the car accident that had killed him, in hopes that she could find further clues about his family. The officer she talked to happened to know a William Baca, but he was alive and working as a security officer at a local mall, and younger than Jelaine. This William Baca, who went by Sam, was Jelaine's half-brother. Like Jelaine, he was also raised with a stepfather, but unlike her, he did know their father. The long-lost half-siblings got in touch, and Sam's wife helped Jelaine coordinate their reunion on Halloween as a surprise for Sam. Sam was able to show Jelaine pictures of their father and tell her things about him, like how much he loved music. The siblings visited their father's grave together, which gave Jelaine a sense of peace. Jelaine and Sam remained close, despite not living near each other, speaking on the phone regularly, and visiting each other when they could. Years later, when commercial DNA kits to test for an individual's heritage and identify their relatives who had also taken a test became widely available, Jelaine was intrigued by the idea of this new potential lead in her search for information about her background. Fearing the effort would result in no answers, however, she was hesitant to take such a test for many years. Then, in February of 2021, Jelaine happened to see that Ancestry DNA was having a sale, and finally decided to take the test. When she got her results, they identified a man whose DNA was a close match to hers, and was most likely her cousin. When she looked at his family tree, she saw two familiar names, Victor and Nora, the names of her paternal grandparents. However, their last name was not Baca, as she expected, but Sinclair. Jelaine messaged the man and received a response from his wife, who managed his profile. When she wrote back, she told Jelaine that she believed she was the daughter of Mervin Sinclair, who had been missing since 1958. She included Mervin's missing person flyer with the message. Jelaine was shocked when she saw the picture on the flyer. Despite the fact that the photo was taken almost 20 years before any of the photos of her father she had seen had been taken, she could tell that it was him. Jelaine messaged back with the photos of her father she had gotten from Sam, and Mervin's one surviving sibling, his sister Darlene, was shocked to see the resemblance he still bore to the rest of his family later in his life. Another DNA match to confirm William Baca's identification as Mervin Sinclair was subsequently made through the RCMP. The Sinclair family was disappointed to hear that Mervin had died in a car accident, but they were relieved he had not been murdered, as they had feared for decades. Others in his family continued to suffer as a result of government policies concerning Indigenous people in the years after he went missing, so they could understand why he might have started a new life rather than face unjust repercussions from the military. They were thrilled to learn that Mervin had 2 children, who they were able to meet and welcome into their family. I feel like I will have a great deal of peace to have this sorted out for my dad. I just hope that, some way, somehow, he knows that we found him, we know his story, and that we love him, Jelaine told CBC News.